Welcome back to another episode of the North Star Takes podcast after a little bit of a hiatus for us. I'm Bailey Policki, he's Jacob Liberta, and we're a Minnesota sports podcast. And you can find all our videos here on our YouTube channel, so please hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And click the like button on this video if you're a Timberwolves fan, because we're going to be discussing some of the latest news from the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, free agency is rapidly approaching, and rumors are starting to swirl about all sorts of players. But let's kind of dig into, first of all, Liberta. We'll get into the draft class a little later in this video, but let's talk about the Wolves. They just re-signed Taurean Prince, 2 years, $16 million deal. They got him back at a cheaper rate than what he was on the team last year for. What are your thoughts on bringing back a vet like TP? You still have your mid-level exception slot available as well to sign another free agent. What are your thoughts on just, bringing back another solid bench player in Taurean Prince?
I think at an $8 million price tag over each of the next 2 years, I think that's incredible value. I think NBA contracts, as we all know, for veteran players can certainly get run up for more than the guy's really worth or what he's really giving your team. But I think this feels right. You have a guy that you already know works in your system and can play very well off the bench and understands his role and could kind of be a veteran presence in the locker room along with Pat Bev. So I like this a lot, especially in the second half of last season. He really got his three ball going. So I think that helps too. I think he's the ultimate kind of 3-and-D guy. Maybe
Yeah.
does a little bit more than that. Maybe that's selling him a little bit short. But at the same time, I think he does a little bit of everything for this team. So I kind of like having him back in the locker room for this young squad that's ever evolving. And I think everybody receives him pretty well too. And he clearly likes it here. So I'm pretty excited about that.
I am too, and just bringing him and Pat Bev back for another season, having that veteran leadership in place. As Cat, becomes more of a leader and he ages, and Ant's kind of starting to figure out the league as well. I think it's helpful to have these guys around for one more season. And as you mentioned, he's obviously a good contributor. He can play the power forward or small forward positions. He can rebound. He's a pretty decent 3-point shooter. So there's a lot of qualities to like about him, and at a cheaper price tag than last year. I agree. I think it's a good value. I'm glad to see him back. I'm not really sure if they would have had any other, better options out there in terms of like a bench power forward type player. So
No, especially for 8 a year.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dig into some of the latest rumors. I think probably the biggest one is the Wolves being interested in Dejounte Murray, the Spurs point guard. There's been other rumors circling about, Clint Capella interest, Rudy Gobert interest, although I think both of those are probably a long shot. There's a rumor this morning about Tyus Jones becoming, he's going to be a free agent. There's potential Wolves interest there as well. So what are your thoughts on some of these latest rumors, surrounding either the point guard position or upgrading at, power forward or center?
Obviously, I think Murray's the big fish here. I think that's the one that really catches the eye and of all Wolves fans out there as far as a potential upgrade to this team to really take it to another level. I think everybody was pretty unhappy with the way the season ended last year for D'Lo. So I know there's still certainly the D'Lo stands out there that believe he was a crucial part to the steps this team took last season, and rightfully he was. But it's just, is he going to take us to another level? I don't know.
Right.
I don't think he's quite the guy that'll play like the third wheel here or like a complementary piece to Ant and Cat the way we need him to. So I kind of feel like if you can land a guy like Murray, I think it makes all the sense in the world. So I'd be pretty excited about that. But I wouldn't, again, going back to the way we've talked about this for the last couple months now since the season ended, that I wouldn't trade D'Lo just to trade him. But I think there's certainly something to be had out there if you can find some way to get Murray in here. So I think getting a guy averaging 21, 8, and 9, especially one that can do a little bit more as far as like facilitating, I would say, and maybe again going back to the complimenting Ant and Cat, I think that helped tremendously.
Yeah, I think Dejounte Murray's just he plays with a quicker pace, so I think that would benefit this team tremendously. I know Chris Finch likes to play with a quicker pace as well, so that'd be nice to have. He doesn't dribble the air out of the ball as much as like D'Angelo Russell, because he's not like a create his own shot type player.
Sure.
So they're different type of point guards, and Murray, he was the king of the triple double this last season. He averaged near a triple double, as you mentioned earlier, and I don't know. He's definitely the most intriguing piece, I'd say, as well. I mean, I would absolutely pursue that if I'm the Timberwolves, because if you think about it, like, yeah, they might want to have, extreme cap flexibility going into next summer, but, you're not necessarily guaranteed to land like a really good free agent next year either. So, like, I feel like if you can trade for a Dejounte Murray, if you can really see him fitting beside Cat and Ant long term, you do it now. You get D'Lo off your books, obviously, and then you extend Dejounte Murray. He's going to want a max contract, and Ant's going to be wanting a max contract coming up, and Cat as well. I would expect him to sign a max contract extension here within the next couple days. At least that's what it's sounding like. So, you'll have 3 maxes on the books if you have Dejounte Murray, but I think it's worth it. And I'd be really interested to see him in this system. Because I'm with you. Like D'Lo had a rough end of the year. A lot of people were upset with him. I could still see him back here for another year just to play out the rest of his contract. And, maybe he plays better because it's a contract year for him. But, I wouldn't trade him just to trade him either. But Dejounte Murray is definitely an intriguing piece. And, Tyus Jones even garners a little interest from me as well because he's basically a juiced up Jordan McLaughlin. I mean, he's better at pretty much everything. But him and Jordan McLaughlin have similar play styles. So when McLaughlin would say Tyus starts, you don't need Tyus to be your scorer because you got Ant, Cat, McDaniels, etc. that can score the rock out there, and maybe even still like a Malik Beasley too. And then, you bring in McLaughlin off the bench, there's not too much of a drop off there. So Tyus Jones is intriguing as well because he plays a quicker pace as well. He tries to, set people up, and he's a good passer, and he's really improved since he's gone to Memphis. So those 2 names definitely intrigue me. But like you mentioned, and like I said too, like I don't want to just get rid of D'Lo to get rid of him. I want there to be a clear upgrade that's going to help this team at the point guard position.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you brought up Tyus there. My biggest thought revolved around that, I guess, is if you bring him back into the mix, I'm kind of wondering who's out then, because like that'd be a lot of point guards, a lot of ball handlers on our roster between obviously D'Lo if he's still on the team, then you got Pat Bev, then you got like you mentioned Jordan McLaughlin, then you have Tyus, and even a little bit of like guys like Jalen Noel or something. I don't know, but it's just there'd be basically too many cooks in the kitchen at that point, so somebody'd have to go. So I'd kind of wonder who that odd man out would be. And yeah, like you said, with McLaughlin and Tyus's playing styles so similar, that would probably feel like the obvious choice. But I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I want to part with McLaughlin, especially when he's playing on such a cheap contract. And Tyus will probably command some decent money, so that concerns me just a little bit. But again, reunion Tyus at the Minnesota guy, that's always cool. But kind of touching on some of the other big names you brought up too, with the big men, I should say, with Gobert and Capella. That does interest me a little bit, but I guess less so after the draft, and we'll get into it. But I think I just don't want to pay either of them as much money as they're making. I don't think it's worth it for a big man when those guys can effectively kind of get played out of the playoff series. Sometimes it's like, do you really want to shell out that much cash for a guy that kind of gets played off the floor in the moments when you need him most? Like that doesn't really do it for me.
Yeah, I can't justify having 2 of your highest paid players both be centers technically. Like Cat's fine because he's kind of a unicorn. He's a very skilled offensive player.
Yeah.
But then if you brought in a Rudy Gobert to be another max player at the center position, even though they play next to each other, and I don't even know if that would be a good fit, having those 2 play next to each other. Like you said, they could get played off the floor in a playoff series. Ant wouldn't necessarily have another wing type scorer that he could rely on. So I feel like that's almost stacking the deck too heavily, in one direction with the centers, because I just think you don't have enough, scoring and stuff on the outside on the wings and at the guard spots. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for me. And yeah, as you mentioned, like with the way the draft played out, I don't think it makes a ton of sense either. Quickly, before we get to the draft picks, let's just talk about how after they introduced the draft picks at, Target Center, Chris Finch was being interviewed, and he talked about how the internal development of Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and Jalen Noel is going to be crucial for the success of this team moving forward. And, they're not going to go anywhere if those 3 don't step it up, basically, is what he said. And I thought it was interesting that he included Jalen Noel's name with the likes of Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels. They clearly must have some sort of plan for Jalen Noel, either that or they're maybe trying to pump up his trade value a little bit. It's probably one or the other. But, I mean, Jalen Noel's a very intriguing player. He's a very talented offensive player. His defense isn't great by any means. He's not exactly a point guard. He's more of a, combo guard, 2 guard. He's very good at getting to the basket. He's not an elite 3-point shooter, but he can definitely hit 3-point shots. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on Chris Finch kind of talking up Jalen Noel with Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels?
That's fascinating because, first of all, I think he's right. I think how far this team goes, I think it does actually hinge upon how much internal development there is between those two guys, especially McDaniels and Edwards. When like McDaniels will probably join the starting lineup next year, so like that's obviously 2 year starters and two of the basically franchise cornerstones, hopefully going forward. So obviously that's gonna play a big part in this team's success and growth and potentially turning ourselves into championship contenders. But throwing in the well too with them, that does I think pique the interest of a lot of people. I mean, if you look at it just on the surface, like look back at the playoff series last year against Memphis or a couple months ago, I should say, and Noel really didn't play that much. So it's like, how much do you really value him? But then you think about it maybe from a broader sense and how he kind of fits into the rotation. If let's say D'Lo gets played out of here and gets replaced by somebody like, for instance, we bring in a Murray, or let's say we maybe trade D'Lo for something else, and then we bring in a guy like Tyus, and you have Tyus and J Mac. Then you also have Noel, who can kind of compensate for the loss of like ISO scoring you got from D'Lo when it did happen. Where I think Noel's probably one of the best ISO scorers on the team, I'd say, who can just create his own shot. So I think that's certainly worth considering too. But I would like to see Noel still here and playing some pretty important minutes next year, just because I think he does, like you said, have a lot of talent to offer.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why, like, as much as it would pain me to like trade Malik Beasley, or, it would hurt to see D'Lo go, especially if we didn't get like a Dejounte Murray in return.
Yeah.
It would definitely clear the way for Jalen Noel, because there's just such a logjam at the guard spots on this team. So, he doesn't really have a similar game to Malik Beasley. He's not like the quick fire 3-point spot up 3-point shooter,
No.
but he does bring a different skill set in the fact that he can drive to the rim. He can create his own shot. So it'd be a little bit different style, and you wouldn't necessarily have that like on fire, 3-point shooting that Malik Beasley brings, but maybe Jalen Noel just brings more value, in his kind of a role. So it would be nice to see that logjam clear up a little bit for him to actually get a legit opportunity, because we've only seen him in spurts, and he's looked very good in those spurts. So it would definitely be good to see him get more minutes this upcoming season. So before we wrap up here, let's just jump in and on this draft class, kind of dive in and, give some of our thoughts. They drafted Walker Kessler out of Auburn, the center, Wendell Moore from Duke, who I think you're a big fan of, and then Josh Minot from Memphis, who's kind of a raw player, but has some potential. Some people think he could potentially be the steal of the draft. And then they drafted an Italian point guard, Matteos. What's his last name? Matteo Spagnolo. Yes, yeah. From Italy.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on this draft class? I mean, I'm kind of surprised they made 4 picks in total, although, they did a bunch of trading around. It didn't stay at their initial draft slots, but they still picked 4 players.
Yeah, I like it. I always get excited about any draft class, no matter what sport it is. I think just the sign of the future, just as far as like guys you can like envision in one way or another how they'd fit into the organization down the road. I think that's always exciting. I always like to plan ahead, so that's always fun. But to take 4 guys, especially in the NBA draft, when look at like last year we walked away with nobody, we didn't draft anybody, so it's kind of nice to replenish that with more young players. I get we're a young team, but it's always nice to keep grooming new guys, just because that's how good teams stay good, and that's how you don't just fall out of it. And I think that's really important too, because in the NBA, you need a few years for guys to really develop and come into their own as far as being true contributors on a team that's actually good. So I think this is important to, I guess, kind of compensate almost a little bit for last year as far as replenishing new young players that we can rely on to be on cheap contracts in these next couple of years as other guys expire out their rookie contracts. Like, for instance, McDaniels and Hant are going to go tremendously up. So it's nice to see if we can get some more skill in here on really economical deals. So looking at it though, like kind of breaking it down as far as their basketball talent goes, I think I'm really excited about Kessler, and obviously the Wolves. That was the glaring issue all of last season, that they actually did a fairly decent job of covering up for the most part, but in the end it kind of killed us in the playoffs as far as the offensive rebounding we allowed to the Grizzlies. But getting a guy like Walker Kessler in here, that's obviously huge. I think that's going to help us both rebounding and then just defense in the paint. I think he was the defensive player of the year in all college basketball last year, averaged almost 5 blocks a game. I mean, the guy is just a tree in the middle there that actually has a little bit of sneaky athleticism too. So I think that really excites me. It can spell cat, especially when Cat gets in foul trouble. That's going to help a lot. And then you think about Wendell Moore, like you mentioned. I'm a huge fan of him just because he's a Duke guy. I like Duke players generally. There's a reason they go to Duke. It's just because
Yeah.
they had pretty high upside or high promise, I guess, coming out of high school. So like they playing for Coach K, that speaks for itself. So I think that really excites me. And this guy, I think Wendell Moore, he can be a real good 3-and-D guy for us, and that's what all those playoff teams have, is at least one of them, if not a couple. So I think him being able to hit, I think 45% on spot up threes and 48% in the corner. I might have got those flip flopped, but just ridiculous 3-point shooting last year as far as percentages goes. Didn't have exactly high volume, but like when he did shoot them, like he had a lot of them. And then being able to defend 2 through 4 on the floor, I think that's huge too. And then being a 6'5" guy, having a 7-foot wingspan is just kind of crazy. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, Minot, I think he's kind of fun just because Memphis, Penny Hardaway, they always like to recruit a lot of these high flyers, these athletes that can kind of jump out of a gym and like jump off the page as far as intangibles go. It's just basically, like you said, he's raw and just growing him into being a basketball player, I guess.
Right.
But I kind of like the idea that a guy coming along and, like you mentioned, could be a steal of the draft just because it's like he has athleticism. You could teach him how to play basketball, basically. So I think that excites me. But there's a lot to like about all of these guys. I don't know. What kind of stuck out to you?
Yeah, first starting with Minot. Actually, I'll start with Spagnolo. They're just going to stash him in Europe. I mean, you won't hear anything from him within the next year or two. So Minot is intriguing though, just because Tim Connolly, I think, kind of likes to take players like this that are projects. Like you said, they're raw, but they're great athletes, and you can develop them into being a basketball player. And I think that's exciting because Jaden McDaniels was seen as pretty raw coming out, and within a couple of years, he's starting to look like a really good basketball player now. Minot probably isn't as skilled as Jaden McDaniels is, but I mean, he could still have that Jared Vanderbilt type energy, that athleticism. I mean, that could be a really exciting piece, especially if Vanderbilt comes to the point where he's too expensive or maybe we want to move on. And we don't need Minot to contribute this year. So you can stash him in Iowa, let him learn in the G League, and go from there. And I'm with you. I like the idea of having a really good athlete that you're just developing into a basketball player. I think that's super exciting. Walker Kessler, he absolutely fits a need. I mean, the Wolves rebounding was atrocious in the playoffs. Naz Reid brought us basically nothing. And I like Naz Reid. He's been fine as a backup center, but I think the problem is he's just too small to be a center. He lost weight as he got into the league, and he wasn't big to begin with. And he's obviously not super tall. I think he's like 6'10" maybe. So
maybe I think that's even generous, but
yeah, maybe 6'9" even. So like he's a small center. And so I don't know what this means for his future going forward. If he's involved in trade discussions now, maybe they play him and Walker Kessler together off the bench. I'm not really sure how they're going to go about it, but yeah, he fills a need. I mean, just having that massive human being in the middle on defense, being able to block shots. And like you said, he's actually got some sneaky athleticism. He can kick out to the corner and hit a 3 every now and then. It's not like he can't shoot. So that's super exciting too. And then, yeah, Wendell Moore. I mean, this guy could be your Swiss Army knife type player. I mean, he's basically the 1-for-1 replacement for Josh Okogie, I would imagine. And, Okogie obviously didn't play much this last season, but if Wendell Moore has more of an offensive skill set, he might be able to find his way into the lineup, when injuries occur or as the season goes on. Maybe he starts to develop and becomes a player that needs to play because he can play really good defense and contribute on offense. So they're going to have some options. I mean, assuming D'Lo stays for now, you still got D'Lo, Bev, Ant, Vanderbilt, and Towns. That was the starting 5 from last year. And then off the bench, you still got McLaughlin, Beasley, Taurean Prince, Naz Reid. Now you add in Walker Kessler, Wendell Moore. You still got Jalen Noel in the mix. So, I mean, that's 11, 12 guys right there how are you going to find playing time for all these guys?
Yeah, it's going to be pretty hard for these rookies to crack the lineup. I think Kessler obviously has a much easier path than the others just because he's really filling a hole that we don't have like currently, like an option to compete with him. Really, I know Naz has like been our backup center, or at least was last year. It's just like you said, he's not quite big enough for that. So it feels like if Kessler's at least decent, he could slide in pretty quick. But in what capacity, I don't know how many minutes that would really look like. Because obviously, Cat's going to probably play 35 minutes a night or something, maybe more than that, 36. So it's like you'd only be spelling him for 12 minutes a game or something, if that. So it wouldn't even be a lot. So I think Kessler you could see sooner rather than later, but the rest of them it might be more of a grooming process, like you said, wait for an injury here and there, because that's going to happen. But so then a guy like Moore or something could get an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be fascinating to see how they fill out this team. And like we mentioned earlier, D'Lo and Beasley could get traded, and then that opens up a couple spots right there. So, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. We're right on the cusp of free agency starting here, and
Yes.
hopefully some trades going down as well. So, any other final thoughts from you before we take off here?
Hey, it's a great time to be a Timberwolves fan. I don't think there's ever been a better time in our lives, at least. So I think get excited about what's to come. I think this offseason could be a lot of fun. So just buckle up.
Heck yeah, man. I mean, the NBA offseason is absolutely fascinating. It's one of the best times of the year with all the movement. Of course, you have all the Kyrie Irving drama in Brooklyn. It seems like every offseason he's stirring up some drama. So, and who knows what's going to come of this free agency. So it'll be interesting to see. And obviously, we'll stand by and be ready for any breaking Wolves news. So, like I mentioned earlier, please hit that subscribe button and click the like button on this video. Make sure to give us a follow on both Twitter and Instagram, and let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. What you think about the Timberwolves draft class, what you think about some of these free agency rumors, and who you'd like to see them go after to improve this team. So until next time, thanks for watching.